Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
I am joined by my next guest, and we're so crazy after all these. It's probably been about only a couple of months, but my evil twin, the man who people go, my goodness, we thought there was just one of them, but obviously they escaped from the lab at the same time. One went east, one went west. They were supposed to be in Constantinople, but ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, and whatever you are identifying as this morning, myself a toaster, it is Jem Duducu. Jem, good morning to you, sir.
Good. Well, howdy there, partner.
Well, yeehaw, yeehaw. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Jem, how are you, first off? How are the planes, how are the rolling planes looking this morning?
Well, there be a storm on the horizon. So I don't know. That sounded West Country. Sorry.
Well, we're talking the Wild West, but I didn't think the Wild West Country.
Yeah, not the West Country.
I mean, there was a night in Exeter once, but let's not even go there. Right. So, Westerns, Jem. Why the Western?
Well, I don't know about you, Giles. I get the feeling probably similar to me. I think we're the last generation that grew up with them as kids. You know, it's Sunday afternoon. There's, you've done your homework, and then on BBC or ITV there would be a John Wayne movie or something like that. And so
Alias
that just isn't a thing today.
Smith and Jones, in my case. If you remember the TV series, The High Chaparral, Alias Smith and Jones,
yes,
all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. High Chaparral. That had a great theme tune to it, didn't it? Also Bonanza and all these other ones.
Yeah. Right.
Anyway, yeah. So I've always had a love of Westerns. I've actually done another book about just sort of generally how history is portrayed in movies.
Yep.
But that led to a conversation with a different publisher going, well, look, why don't you do one about Westerns as a whole? And the more I looked into it, it's like you can't pull out Westerns as a genre and understand how Hollywood evolved. They are that integral to it. They've been that popular for that long that, they are a really interesting subject. Even if you're not hugely into 10-gallon hats, if you love your movies, then you really should give respect to the genre of Westerns.
And one of the things that you've pointed out is the fact that when we think of, I don't know, sword and sorcery movies or medieval ones or samurai, for example,
yep.
And I hadn't thought about this, but then I sort of listened to something, as they say, one you prepared earlier, and there are the samurai. We all think, we know what they look like, Bushido, all that sort of stuff, men running around and whopping each other's heads off. There's 1,000 years of samurai. There's just because they're first in 1060. They're first around about this. They're obviously not
1000 AD.
Yeah, exactly. They're not at the Battle of Hastings, but they're the same time scale, and they go up until Tom Cruise appears, and everybody goes, right, that's it. We're not doing Bushido. We're not doing Bushido anymore because Tom Cruise has just rocked up. So, but with the Western, there is a very small window of historical fact, and that is basically end of American Civil War. Although obviously there are spaghetti westerns that take place during up to 1913, 14 max?
Well, actually, the sort of the general definition is to 1899.
Right.
But then again, perhaps one of the best examples, everybody sort of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Well, that's happening just after 1899. It's happening in the 1900s, and half of the movie's happening in Bolivia, which isn't really part of the Wild West, but it's definitely a Western. So actually, it's one of these things where to actually define a Western that fits everything that you would consider a Western, it always breaks down. But let's face it, there's got to be hats. There's got to be gunslinging, some kind of frontier type town. And it is interesting as I sort of had a conversation with a film critic about it. And he basically said, pretty much after the spaghetti Western era of the 1860s, from that point onwards, every Western has been about the end of the Western era. It's like a passing of a time. And it is a very, as you said, the samurai, 800-900 years. Nobody died an old sort of like frontiersman because that period was basically, in real terms, it was about 30 years.
Yeah.
So it wasn't you're going to be not pass it down father, son. It just wasn't that long. And yet there are so many movies about this very niche era.
And because everybody goes, okay, Western, they're thinking, Gary Cooper, John Wayne, but But if you know your history, cinema doesn't begin with the talkies. Cinema begins on very small budgets, in Hollywood or in California. And the easiest way to make something look big and look impressive is not build a set, but go to what, the good Lord built himself. So is this one of the reasons that A, the stories are simple, because there's no talkies, but B, the set's already there because it's California, it's the Wild West, it's Death Valley, etc. I know that's Nevada, but you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. And well, the other example being, of course, you got Monument Valley, those gigantic pillars of stone are better than any set any human being could ever build. And yet all you need is to get a filming permit and then stick up your camera and you got something that looks like $1 million that cost, $4.50 kind of thing. So absolutely. It's, they are cheap and cheerful. The analogy I'd give today is horror movies. Most horror movies are not big budget affairs. Yeah. There's already a baked in audience. They don't tend to get a lot of love from the Oscars, but it makes you money. And that's exactly what the Western was pretty much from the silent era into the 1960s. So you're talking about a good, healthy sort of 40, 50 years. And even then, after the 60s, they pop up from time to time. It could be your Sam Peckinpahs, etc. The spaghetti westerns do go on into the 70s. Yeah. So, and then there's a resurgence with dances which will suddenly become classy. You get Unforgiven and so on and so forth. And so they suddenly go up in terms of, now they're arts. Which is a sort of really interesting way of looking at them because they were just churned out cheap and cheerful. And
that's the thing, because, with the greatest respect to those early sort of 1920s movies, it's very simple to follow, and the good guys are in white hats and the bad guys, the bad guys in white hats. And I was listening to, as I said, the work you did earlier, and you introduced me to this towering Leviathan.
Yes.
Who was earning $20,000 a week in the 20s in Hollywood. That makes Cristiano Ronaldo look like he's on a paper round, for goodness sake.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, so the way it was introduced to me is my father, who is from Turkey, was an avid fan in the 1950s of cowboy movies. It shows you the international interest in these things. And he read a comic book based on a real cowboy called Tom Mix. And it turns out Tom Mix was a real guy. And I did the research, but that started the journey, because today in 2025, 100 years after his peak, nobody has heard of Tom Mix unless you've really done your research. He was a soldier in the American Army. He sort of served his time doing various things. Then he got into, this is the thing, a cowboy is basically a farm worker. Yeah. They don't shoot people. They herd cows, they mend fences and things like that. So he was doing stuff like that. He was doing stunt work on the back of horses, on the back of cows, etc. And then he started making movies. But the real genius of him is he created the very first purpose-built Western frontiers town, which became known, his name's Tom Mix, and it became known as Mixville. So, he's going to shoot his Westerns this week in it, then he'll rent it out to Warner Brothers next week, and they shoot their Western. This is why the Westerns tend to look the same, because there was no law to say that saloons had to have those swingy doors at the front of it. But if that's the way I built it, and then this week the door's red, next week the door's green, we just repaint it to look a little bit different. And it was an incredibly efficient way to keep telling the same old stories. And as you said, in the silent era, you don't want a lot of place cards with information. So the good guys tended to wear white hats and the bad guys tended to wear black hats. So you instantly got a visual code as to good guy, bad guy. Out come the guns, pow, 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 pow. But of course, it's all silent.
Yeah, and damn you, Jen, because I was about to talk about the swinging doors. Because not only this weekend, I was at an event with a swinging door, a kitchen door, and somebody walked through it before me, and health and safety had to feel it because it swung back at waist height and got me straight down the middle leg, as the saying goes. So very painful indeed. So the other thing is, and I like the idea of Mixville. I mean, imagine if a bunch of David Guetta got transported into Mixtown or whatever. A horrendous mix-up sends a bunch of DJs into the Wild West. There's a thought. So massive. He's doing, and the other thing, he's doing all his own stunt work. He's riding. Yep. I mean, health and safety have a field, but also the animal rights lot. He's riding horses through plate glass windows. He gets shot in the throat, for goodness sake.
Yes, and that's what causes him problems when everything moves to sound, because at that point he doesn't sound very good. So his career basically, I think he did 5 talkies, just didn't happen, and so he retires. Although my mother, who is American, she remembers being bored rigid because all the boys in the family, including her father, would listen to the Tom Mix radio show in the 1950s, which didn't feature him, but it's like his name was still had that cachet. So the imagery was Tom Mix, and he was clearly earning a bit of money from it. So it shows you how he echoed across decades of, I mentioned comic books, I mentioned radio, I mentioned movies. He's a multimedia icon before that term was ever used.
He's a franchise, isn't he, basically? He is the franchise. And also, he's got this young guy with a very effeminate name who comes and hangs out with him for a while, who will come back later in our story.
Yeah, absolutely. So to sort of like seal together your whole samurai thing, etc. The comparison I give is samurai existed, but the movies have mythologized them. In the West, knights existed, but we've mythologized them. And it's the same thing with the cowboy era, the frontier era as well. But the difference between those 3 eras is the guys who were alive in the Wild West era were literally alive during the silent era. So the example I give is Wyatt Earp got to know Tom Mix. So the two of them were working together. When Wyatt Earp died, Wyatt Earp, co-created some of the movies, very early silent movies about the gunfight at the OK Corral. So of course he's going to make it bigger and sexier and things. As one person said, it's the most exciting 15 seconds in history. And it's like, the gunfight was not long at all. Yeah. Some of the guys weren't even armed, and yet that's not the way it's portrayed in the movies. However, so you got Wyatt Earp literally working with Tom Mix, but then in the background you got this stagehand called Marion, and he's introduced to Wyatt Earp, and that guy gets a name change, and he becomes known as John Wayne. So John Wayne, a man who died in the 1970s, he started his career with one of the genuine heroes of the Wild West.
Right. Should we get all deep and meaningless, Jem, as we do all the time? Right.
Always.
All right. So we've got we have the Western. It is the fodder. It is the Saturday morning cinema club. You get Flash Gordon, then you get Western. Then we get the Second World War, which sort of interrupts something somewhat. And then when we come back with the Cold War, and this is an era when 2 things. You've got the self-censoring, which will come and keep your foot on the floor at all times. No kiss longer than 3 seconds. And you cannot show a good guy shooting a bad guy in the same shot. So for example, if it's a barroom brawl, you've got the guy on the left with a white hat and the guy on the right in the same scene or the same shot. He can't be seen shooting directly. There has to be a shot and then a following shot. Am I got that right, Jim?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So your example there is literally if you have on the left the good guy, the right on the bad guy, and he fires and the guy goes down, all in that same take, that's not acceptable. So what you do is you tend to have a close-up of the good guy firing the gun, and then a second take of the bad guy crumpling, and therefore there is technically an edit between those, the cause and effect, and therefore that's acceptable. However, meanwhile, in Italy, a young man called Sergio Leone, he didn't know about the Hays Code, as this was called, and so he just does all this stuff. Now, to modern eyes, looking at the Dollars trilogy, it's gritty and it's violent, but it's not shockingly violent. I mean, there isn't a lot of blood everywhere, but because you don't get these cuts in between these events, it was shocking to American audiences.
Yeah, and the other thing, of course, and here we go, ladies and gentlemen, because Jem and I are now firing up. The thing is, the Western is the good guy who is American, who is John Wayne or Gary Cooper, is standing for what is right, and what is right is American. Let's just trample over the natives, and we're in the middle of the bleeding Cold War, Jem. So you can get all the symbolism you want here, but this is basically, you're in the desert, they're just dropping a few atomic tests on the left there, but don't worry about it, it's fine, I've got a silly hat, I'll be fine. And it absolutely stands for, American presidents are showing high noon, up until the 90s as American policy. Eisenhower, that one, who, just as a small thing called, the D-Day campaign, etc., and then becomes, Ike is showing those movies. They stand for everything that America is about. Reagan, for goodness sake. And so that as a cipher for the Cold War, John Wayne, the whole bit, all those wonderful movies, they are, showing that the American way and the West subconsciously, this is what it's all about during the Cold War.
Absolutely. And I think it is underestimated how popular Western movies were across the world, in the post-war era. I didn't have time to put this into the book, but I loved the fact, I've discovered this fact that, surprisingly, John Wayne Westerns were hugely popular in the Middle East because he would sort of say they'll go, are you going to win this time? And he'll say something like, God wills it, or God damn it, I'll try,
yeah.
which is translated to Allah Akbar. So it's sort of like he always came across as a good Muslim boy to the Muslims. It's like, yeah, we want this good Muslim boy to shoot all the bad guys. And again, the bad guys are bad. There's no subtlety to them whatsoever. They're stealing the cows. They're attacking the women. Of course you want them. It doesn't matter which culture you're from. You always want these guys to meet their justice. There is not a lot of nuance going on here.
Rustling the women and attacking the cows. I've just John Wayne as an Islamic hero has just blown my mind.
Yes.
Completely.
Yeah.
But Wayne is front and center because he is in one of my, and this is the thing about the Western, because it gets under your skin because we're that age, Leon, the Professional, one of my favorite films of all time. And Jean Reno comes out, and it probably get cancelled now, but 30 years ago, the Natalie Portman looking, and let's not even go there, but he comes out, but he is a film buff. So obviously, we love Leon because he is us, basically, what we would want to be in terms of, likes films and kills people, in an but he does, well, it's true, isn't it? And it alters it, because you and I are both gamers and the whole thing.
Leon is an amazing movie. It has one problematic element to it, but the rest of it, no notes, 5 stars.
Exactly, fine. But he does this John Wayne impersonation.
Yeah.
And you think,
he does.
And of course, Natalie Portman hasn't got a bleeding clue. Now, however, by the 60s, and here we go again, parallel, because nothing exists in a vacuum apart from you and me, obviously, in our whatevers. But the Vietnam War's going off. There is a student movement. The horrors of war are being brought right into our living rooms or every day with the stuff that's coming out of the Vietnam War. And you get the spaghetti westerns, and you get the Wild Bunch, and you get, my favorite, Once Upon a Time in the West, which is just a bit. Henry Fonda blows his reputation.
Yes.
There you go. He blows his reputation out of the window. It is the biggest turnaround. It is like, I don't know, Tom Cruise playing the devil, but he's done that already. But you know what I mean? It's like him playing, you know what I'm saying here, because he completely turns himself around. So they become gritty and close-ups of people going, and that's a Sergio Leone close-up. Explain, Jem. Explain.
Yeah, absolutely. So suddenly there is this more moral ambiguity, which starts with the spaghetti westerns. Now, it is worth pointing out, the reason why they're called spaghetti westerns is they knew that they were filmed by Italians. What most people didn't realize is they were filmed in Spain.
If you live in Spain, you do.
They should be paella westerns. There we go. Yes.
Almeria. Almeria is, yeah.
And, as several people have said, it took an Italian in Spain to show the Americans what the Western was.
Yeah.
It's really weird. But yeah, to the Americans, it was shocking. Again, back to the Hays Code and going back to some of the earlier ones. Look, John Wayne did do morally complex Westerns, perhaps the best one being The Searchers.
Yeah.
But, in The Searchers, he's sort of traveling for years trying to find his niece, and yet he's always clean shaven. Whereas, so people were shocked by the fact that Clint Eastwood had stubble and he had sweat, but that's what you look like if you've been through the desert for 3 days. And he's also wearing dark clothing. Do you remember what I said about the white hats and so it's like, hang on, John Wayne's wearing a dark hat and he's sort of shooting people and not. He shoots first, asks questions later. This is all far more morally ambiguous. And this was absolutely picked up with, as you said, the likes of Sam Peckinpah and the Wild Bunch, and also Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Yeah. These are incredibly sort of brutal, bleak, nihilistic. And there is no doubt that while they're wearing cowboy hats, this is a reference to the bleak violence that the Americans are seeing from the Vietnam War on TV every evening.
So when do you think that, and you make this very interesting thing about the fact that during the late 60s, because it's fashionable, there are some really dodgy hairstyles. But if you, again, back to my favourite Western, Once Upon a Time in the West, wonderful. I mean, she's gorgeous. I mean, I weep, when she gets to her home, I have to, it gets very dusty. I won't do a spoiler in case nobody's watched it, right? But the music swells. The music is wonderful. You got harmonica, full orchestra, which you wouldn't have had back in those days. It's very 60s style. The hair is very 60s. The hairstyle, some of the male hairstyles are quite interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing sort of like throw in there is, the ethnicity of these people in the 50s and 60s. American audiences weren't used to seeing people of color. Yeah. Whereas if you do the research, and it makes complete sense after the Civil War, I'm a black man. I am not staying in Georgia, funnily enough. And so where do I go? A lot of them did go to urban environments like Chicago and New York, but a lot of them decided to set up on the wild frontier, a totally clean slate, own my own land. Why not? And so there is, the numbers are hard to sort of like 100% verify, but it seems about 20% of the guys on the frontier were black. You do not see 20% in like a John Wayne movie, or even in something like even like a Clint movie, because there just weren't that many black people in cinema in crossing between Italy and Spain at that time.
Never mind that. I mean, what again, because we're of a certain generation, but native, native.
Yes.
Now, can we just two things? Education of Little Tree. We're not calling that a Western. That's a Dustin Hoffman film, because that's more. I mean, there's a Western theme to it, but not really. But Soldier Blue, which I rewatched. Exactly. Now in some ways it is, but it is. Spoiler alert, they get attacked, and one of the American captains decides rather than get attacked, he'll just take the ultimate get out clause. And it's that whole idea that actually you can be, native culture is different. And this is 1970, this is Peter Strauss, for God's sake. And, it's a representation that you haven't seen before, because they have always been the guys on. Well, unfortunately, they haven't got composite bows, but you know what I'm saying here, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And so this is where we get something like A Man Named Horse is like the first step in the right direction in terms of depiction of native culture. But, it sort of peaks with Dances with Wolves, where we are seeing it from their point of view. It is, Clint Eastwood is apparently proud of the fact that he did about a dozen Westerns, and he never shot a native once. Whereas John Wayne, Stagecoach is an amazing, black and white classic Western, John Ford, etc. But, there's an awful lot of, it's just the natives are bad guys. Why? Because they're bad. It is back to the black and white type of stereotype about good and bad, and that's it. And so it is terrible representation going on there. Soldier Blue, its heart's in the right place, but it's pretty much unwatchable to the modern audience because the girl in it, as you said, it's 1970s. The girl in it, even though we're in the 1880s, couldn't be more of a hippie if she tried. It's like, really?
Yeah.
Is she going to say groovy man at some point in the 1880s? But then, as you say, it ends up with this horrific massacre, which is very brutal and visceral, and that's what gets it its reputation. Yeah. But it's, I think it goes, it's like I say, its heart's in the right place. I think it's actually shot more like a sort of exploitation horror movie. And then there's an interminable amount of time following this hippie girl around. Not every Western is brilliant. I'm more than happy to say that. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. So, and then come the 70s, of course, it's much more introspective because the Vietnam generation comes back. We've got things like Serpico, French Connection. It's crime thing. Yep. It's against the man. What's it, Days of the Condor with Robert. That's a great performance from Robert Redford with people over Flight, whatever it's called.
3 Days of the Condor.
That's the one. That exact opening shot for them. Violence. But but it gets much more introspective. So it sort of drops off before we have Dancing with Oscars, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. Oh, and this is the thing with all genres. Let's look at superhero movies.
I'm glad you said that. I'll just set you up. You just knock them out.
There you go. Yeah. From about the year 2000 to about the year 2020, they were you make it, even if it's an average superhero movie, it will make you money. Yeah. Whereas post-COVID, they will still make money, but only if they're really good. The lazy sort of like Ant-Man 3s of this world, I can't be bothered, therefore I won't go. And it's the same thing with Westerns. By the 1970s, there's 50 years of these movies that you can check back on. The dramas, the comedies, the da-da-da. And really people they just moved on. There's nothing else to say. And there are a couple of bright sparks in the 1980s. There's High Plains Drifter. There's Young Guns and Young Guns Part 2. But these are the exceptions that prove the rule. People were not making a lot of Westerns in the 1980s. And really, it was Dances with Wolves that sort of creates this new renaissance of it. But that's faded away. And today, you're not making big Westerns for the cinema consumption and expecting a good return. But they are alive and well in TV.
Yes, they are indeed. And yeah, of course. I mean, almost, but the other thing is just as like say I saw both those movies, the Clint one, and Unforgiven on the big screen. And then, and that was high culture, if you like. And then you've got Young Guns 2, which is like Bon Jovi's a soundtrack. It's Charlie Sheen, who would have loved to have been, if it'd been set in Bolivia for various reasons. You'd never get on. It would have been it would have been a 3-minute movie, but it was, and we'll throw Lou Diamond Phillips in to give a bit of colour and he can run. Do you know what I'm saying? But those are the two ends of the spectrum, aren't they? In a week, basically.
And like with any genre, it's very flexible.
Yeah.
For a while, the biggest grossing Western was actually Blazing Saddles, a comedy, which predominantly features a man of color and points out the inherent racism in the Wild West. No notes there. None. However, of course, if that's the very first Western you see, you won't get it. Right. You have to have been literate. You have to have seen, 10 other Westerns to understand why these jokes are funny, apart from, obviously, the scene around the campfire. That's just inherently amusing.
Yes. Absolutely. So, the new book, Jem. Let's do a shameless plug, shall we? What are you hoping that people will discover from the new book?
So the history of the Western movie is it's not actually out now. I think it's released next week. It's available for pre-order now, absolutely, and it does take you from the very, very first one. The very first one I could find, a short from 1899, which is a very unusual film. I'll tease that out there, right. And it takes us all the way up to 2025, talking about each chapter is talking about a different evolution of the genre and how it's changed. And I even spend one chapter talking about neo-westerns, about how Mad Max is a Western, basically, and how Yellowstone, which I do not like, I think it's a very average drama, but it's done huge guns and had loads of spin-offs. Why? Because it's so American. A police procedural is the same in Germany as it is in Britain, as it is in America, but there's only one place you can ride a horse and lasso a cow, apparently, and that's America. So it doesn't matter if there's also a car in the background, but the point is, I want to see Kevin Costner with a big hat on again.
Absolutely. And never mind about the Wild West country as we start this interview off. Jem, if people want to catch up with your podcast, Condensed History, and there's a Facebook page and so many willing fans of where can they find more ramblings like this Condensed Histories podcast, wherever you get podcasts, it'll be there. I'm Jem Duducu on X, Blue Sky, Threads, and as you say, History Gems with a G. See what I did there years ago? That's the Facebook page, which sort of alerts you to what I'm doing at the moment. But yeah, that's me. What's the book called again?
The History of the Western Movie. Best thing to do is just type into Amazon Jem Duducu, because there's only one of them. You'll see it appear. Okay? Their surname Duducu. We were very poor. We could only afford one vowel.
Yes, well, indeed. Once again, I'll get you back next month. Have we any thoughts? Are we going to the Nam?
We're doing Vietnam. We're definitely doing Vietnam, baby.
Yes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, get your cam cream ready because we're going into the hearts of darkness next time round. Jem, the man who is I'm honoured to be called your evil twin, Jem Duducu. Thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure.